Bridget, hello.
Yes, hello, and good afternoon.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. How are you doing here right now? You are in Denmark?
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Sun is shining, so
Good.
you're happy?
Good. In Riga as well. In Riga as well. So, Trine Bridget, the stage is yours, and take your time, and we are very open to hear and see what you're going to say.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you first of all for the opportunity to speak about work-life balance with a view to collective agreements and how collective agreements can be a tool for securing work-life balance for all. The starting point for my presentation is that from an employer's perspective, a high level of female participation is important and desirable as well. This is both seen from a labor supply angle, but also from a diversity angle. When we speak about gender equality, it's also important for society. Going back to businesses, first of all, labor supply is a prerequisite for being in business. We need both women and men in the labor force, but we also need both women and men to be able to create gender diverse enterprises and to be able to create what we call a food chain, so to speak, as regards reaching the aim of more diversity in management. Could I have the next slide? Yes, please. If you look at this slide, you see that we have a relatively high labor market participation of women, almost at the same level of men in Denmark. The employment rate for women is age between 25 to 65 is 76.2%. As for men, it's 83%. This is, in an EU context, rather high. So with some right, I think we could claim that we are doing something right in order to have a balanced participation of men and women in the workplace. Next slide, please. Now, with a high level of employment of both men and women, it's relevant also to have a look into how do we cope with work and family life, since we have a huge age variety. Here, I've shown you the figures on how we rate as regards work-life balance and satisfaction. 89% have responded that they are satisfied with the work-life balance. These figures are from 2018 from a Eurobarometer survey. So how do we arrive at that? And could we explain this by the way we regulate family leave in legislation and in collective agreements? As you might know, the Danish labour market is regulated by collective agreements to a large extent, whereas legislation provides for what you would call more like a floor of more basic rights. When it comes to maternity leave and family-related leave, this is also the case. Next slide, please. As you can see here from this slide, our maternity leave and family leave legislation dates more than 100 years back. A leave scheme was introduced back in 1913. However, it took more than 60 years before a state benefit was introduced. White-collar workers, though, had a right to half of their pay for 1 month, which was introduced back in 1947. Then we have a large gap in the 1980s and the 90s. Parental leave and paternity leave was introduced into Danish legislation. A major revision followed in 2002, which at that time, it was decided to give a lot of flexibility to parents to decide how to share the now 52 weeks of state benefit during maternity, paternity, and parental leave. Due to the Work-Life Balance Directive, which was agreed upon a couple of years ago in the EU, this system will have to be changed to a certain extent by next year. How this is going to be done, it's still under discussion with the government and between the social partners. Next slide, please. When we then have a look at the collective agreements and family-related leave, it took a while before we have introduced pay rights. But as you can see, they have developed since the 90s. The front runner in this respect at the private labour market has been the industry sector, but others have followed. Also, the level of payments have gradually been improved, as well as the number of weeks concerned. In 2004, another important aspect of collective agreements was introduced. Via the so-called Maternity Fund, it became possible for employers to get a reimbursement of some of their payments to parents on family leave. This fund means that employers with a high number of female employees are compensated when their workers make use of their right to maternity or family leave. The fund has also gradually been extended in scope, so it covers also now paternity leave and parental leave. The intention and the behind, oh, I think you're going too fast with my slides, please. Could you take it a bit back? Thank you. The intention is to support the female employment and employment of parents, because if employers have expenses caused by the leave schemes and the pay issues, then they also are compensated. So you can say that it's a kind of solidarity between employers, making employers with a lot of female participation able to actually provide these facilities for their employees, and also in order to make it possible for fathers to take up paternity leave and parental leave without losing their salary. It's also very important to note that the collective agreements operate with earmarking of rights to pay, which is currently not in our legislation, but it is in the collective agreements. If we look a little more into the collective agreements, we normally say from the Danish employers' side that they provide for a lifetime approach, a sort of a lifetime travel, and that they also provide for flexibility for the employees with respect to the benefits they favor, adjusted to their life situation at a given time. This aspect might give an answer to why we have a relatively high level of work-life balance satisfaction. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll get a brief overview of what we cover in the collective agreements of the wage elements, and also an indication of why we actually address the collective agreements in a lifetime approach. First of all, wage and local wage negotiations provides for a lot of flexibility. 85% of wages are decided at local level. The same goes for working time regulations. It's flexible and locally decided in negotiations. As mentioned, there has been a continuous development of pay rights related to family leave and maternity leave. So this is also an important aspect. Also pension and pension contributions has been part of the collective agreements since 1989. This provides for security once you're leaving the labour market, and is actually a quite large part of our collective system. Lifelong learning was introduced in 1993. And again, a new fund was introduced in 2007, again providing for workers during their working life to be better at what they're doing, or even to transfer to other employment. And then as a final element, which actually dates back to 1947, we have the cooperation agreement. Contains chapters on equal treatment and equality, and an obligation to discuss this in the cooperation boards at the company level. Here again, an element which takes on board issues of gender equality as a main thing. Next slide, please. If I turn more specifically to the family-related pay in collective agreements, here we have a total of 36 weeks with full salary. The distribution of these weeks is as follows: 18 weeks during maternity leave, 2 weeks to fathers for paternity leave, 5 weeks of parental leave to mothers, 8 weeks of parental leave to fathers, or the parent not on maternity leave. This unequal distribution has been approved by the Ministry of Employment as a positive incentive to promote more equality at the labour market, and in order to facilitate that fathers take more of the leave in our current scheme. And finally, there are 3 weeks of parental leave, which the parents can share by themselves and decide on by themselves. As earlier mentioned, we have the Maternity Fund, which equalizes all employers' payment of salary during employees' absence on maternity leave, parental leave, etc. Our system in the collective agreements runs in conjunction with the state benefit. Employers who are paying salary during leave to employees receive the state benefit as a reimbursement. So they are compensated by the state of some of their expenses. This has also been a factor in developing family-friendly provisions in the collective agreements. Next slide, please. And briefly, this table just shows the level of allowance and number of weeks with pay in the private sector and the public sector, where there are some differences. As for pay of wages during family-related absence in the private sector, we provide for 36 weeks of pay, whereas in the public sector, they provide for, in the collective agreements, I should say, they provide for 42 weeks of pay. Again, with this division, 18 mothers maternity leave for 18 weeks, sorry, for maternity leave reserved to mothers, and 2 weeks of paternity leave to the father. Next slide, please. But pay during family-related leave is not the only aspect of collective agreements. Other elements as well are part of our collective agreements and has an impact as regards work-life balance. First of all, during child illness, a very important element, I would say, is that you have a right to absence with pay upon children's illness. Recently, and that is in the collective bargaining from 2020, the number of days was increased to 2 days in a row. Only one parent can use this this right at a time, but there's no number no limit on the number of illnesses that you can actually be away from your work with on this condition. Then you have a right to leave for 1 week for 12 months with full salary if your child under the age of 14 is hospitalized. And finally, it has been agreed that there should also be 2 days of carers leave, again, for children under the age of 14. It's important here to note that there's no benefits or wage entitlement during this kind of leave. But, and I will come back to that later, you can finance it via the so-called, what we call a free choice agreement, which is also a part of the collective agreement. We believe that these initiatives have a very big impact on the possibilities to balance work and family life, especially in the life phase where you have small or younger children. And we also think that it has quite an impact on the high level of satisfaction with the work-life balance in Denmark. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have what we call a free choice wage account in collective agreements. These also provides for the lifetime approach. As you can see, it's currently 6% of your salary can be divided or financed as the employee would like himself or herself. Next year, this percentage will be raised to 7%. You can either use this 7% as a pure wage payment. You can put it into your pension fund, or you can decide that you will use it for pay during your absence. And that could, for instance, be if you want to use carers days during 1 year. The employee can choose once a year, so there's a flexibility included in that. Again, if you have small children, then you might have an incentive to use it on absence. But once your children are above the age of 14, you might want to put it into your pension fund instead. Next slide, please. And just very briefly on working time. Working time and flexible working hours is also part of being able to juggle family and working life. Normal working hours must be placed between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. You can vary your working hours during the year. The 37 hours per week can be calculated over a year, so you can also have that flexibility, again, upon agreement and often locally. There's an easy access to part-time, depending on agreement between employer and employee. And then again, the derogations from these provisions must be made locally at company level, which again can sort of tailor size the use of the collective agreements to a specific sector, to a specific branch, etc. Next slide, please. And finally, and what is also important in when we speak about work-life balance, it's how we provide for childcare. It's also a prerequisite for high levels of employment of parents, both men and women. So in a Danish context, it's due to the way that the state is facilitating childcare facilities, both for children under the age of 3 and even younger. As you can see from this slide, 66% of children under the age of 3 in Denmark is in formal childcare, and 92% under the compulsory school age is in formal childcare. It's worth noting that formal childcare is affordable in Denmark, and it's subsidized by the state, which may also differ according to an employee's income. So that is decided on an individual basis, but and has in principle nothing to do with the employer's situation. But as employers, it's something that we look a great deal into, because it has to be affordable if we should have access to the necessary labor force. I hope that I have, by this presentation, provided you with some information about the framework in Denmark, which leads to workplaces that are both, in particular, family friendly, but also is intended to secure some a level of gender diversity. Some of the figures, I think, indicate at least that overall the Danish workforce is satisfied with their work-life balance, and it's also our hope that by providing the flexibility in the collective agreements, they offer some possibilities to parents so that they, with a good conscience, can take care both of their children and their work as long as you have young children. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hougaard, and thank you for sharing the Danish and your experience.